You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is Thursday, August 14th, 2025, 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And tonight I thought we would talk about how avoidantly attached people experience intimacy. One of the things that come up quite a bit, mostly from preoccupied people wondering how their dismissing partners are working and what they can do to affect it. So we could talk about it from that point of view, but it might also be of interest to people that are dismissing in understanding the dynamics of that. Avoidant attachment comes from profound neglect in childhood. And so secure attachment comes from good enough parenting. And when we describe good enough parenting, what we really mean is that 30% of the time or better, your needs were met. And so when we talk about dismissing attachment or any insecure or disorganized attachment, what we're really talking about is a fairly adverse environment for the child to grow up in. The thing about profound neglect is that it means that your caregivers are present, but they're not available to you. And it's reliable, right? You don't worry about it too much. You just know that they're not really present and able to meet your needs. And that sense of consistency is what really allows you to give up on them in a way that preoccupied people don't. The dynamic for a preoccupied person is every now and then they get the care that they need. They just can't figure out what they did that got them the care at that time. So they become enmeshed in the mind state of the caregiver in an attempt to figure out what to do so that they can elicit the care that they want, where the person who experiences profound neglect never has that consistency of their needs being met. They're always in a position of having to respond in the way that the caregiver wants. And what's important, what matters to them is not of particular consequence. Dismissing people also were avoidant people. There's a thing about talking about attachment, which is the sets of labels that we have around them. We have the original child set. We have then the set that came later that describes adult attachment. And then we have the division between the purely research-oriented side and then the sociology side, which is more colloquial in the way that it's discussed. So anxious avoidant is the child state and dismissing is the adult state. One of the things that you learn as a child, if you have neglect, is to frame the world in the way that the caregivers that you have respond. And so really what you're centered on is how they like the world described. And so you learn how to do that. You learn it in a transactional framework. You make the presentation and they give you the care that you want. And because it's the neglect happens before other developments might happen, there isn't the perspective that there's different ways to operate in the world. One of the characteristics about dismissing people is that they understand that the way that they are operating in the world is a great way to operate. And they like to get good at operating in that way. What happens to people who move beyond that early stage of auto-regulation, which is what dismissing people do, mainly regulate themselves independent of others, is create this perspective that there is that, but there's something else. But dismissing people typically don't have that perspective. So those of us who do move on beyond that early stage and have that perspective often can personalize the behavior of a dismissing person and think that they are doing it intentionally, that they have insight and options to do it in a different way, and they choose in this terrible manner to use the more truncated and limited approach. Not only do they choose in a terrible manner to do that, they do it to us personally. But actually, what they're thinking is, this is a great way to do it, and I'm really good at it because I always get what I want out of the situation. That you don't is because you're not as good at it, not because I have any obligation to meet your needs really beyond the transaction that we're currently in. Is that making sense? Uh, One of the characteristics of dismissing attachment is the suppression of emotion. So they're not particularly feeling. Empathy and compassion, of course, are emotional experiences. And if you suppress awareness of emotion, you're not particularly empathetic because you don't allow the experience of that. It's hard to be intimate in the way that a secure person might consider intimacy if you can't feel anything. And it depends on how deep the suppression is. Some avoidant, some dismissing people are able to recognize facial expressions and body language, but some are not. And so it's purely cognitive without any emotion. How do you have an intimate understanding of someone else if you're blind to the experience of their emotional states? If you're cognitive, of course, what that means is that you have to elicit from them in language of some kind what their experience is. And so you have a limited perspective of what their experience is, which is dependent on what they tell you. And so you get good at eliciting from people what it is that you want to know about them, but you don't have any direct way of feeling it, any direct way of validating it in the same way that you would if you were empathetic. In empathy, of course, what we do is we use it to understand whether we think somebody is telling us the truth or not. Um, 4 levels of empathy I like to talk about. The first one is the whinginess that happens in witnessing somebody else's physical or emotional pain. You actually have a body response to that. You're in the kitchen, you're making dinner, you're talking to somebody, they're chopping the vegetables, they cut their finger, they have that immediate response, and then you have a response right after that is the witness of that. You hear sliding tires and the banging of metal, and you have a response, sort of a visceral response to it. If you have the first level of empathy, if you don't have the first level of empathy, then you don't feel anything in response to it. Hopefully you do, because we think if you don't, you're a sociopath. You probably are. But what is that? 1 or 2 out of 100. The second level of empathy is you can look at somebody and read their facial expression and body language and understand that that represents their internal emotional state. How would you learn to read somebody's facial expression and body language? Because somebody taught you. We don't come into the world with that capacity. And then it would depend on how good your teacher is, how skillful you are at being able to do that. In the English language, I'm fond of saying there are 220 words that represent discrete emotional states. Thinking back on your childhood experience of being instructed on what emotions are, of the 220 possibilities, what'd you get? I'm going to guess most people it's around 15. If it's a really rich environment, and if it's not, it's 4 or 5. Right? The Atlas of Emotion, which is a website, not an app, has a pretty good display of all of those emotions. If you want to look at it, they're centered on the basic 7: anger, fear, sadness, uh, disgust, contempt, surprise, happiness is the Ekman group. It's like an inkjet printer. You have 7 colors, and all those colors mixed together to form that full range of emotions. The third level of empathy we call compassionate empathy in Buddhism, where you actually feel in your body a facsimile of what somebody else is feeling. And it's a sensation that appears in the body. And we tend to use the second, the external presentation, and the third, the way it feels. And if they match, we believe that the person is in an authentic expression. And if they don't match, we think that they're in an inauthentic expression. That's how we tell. Secure people, of course, have a fourth, which is they compare what people say they're going to do with what they do, which is an interesting dilemma for people who are not secure, because early on in childhood, we learn to split off that part because we can't match what our caregivers are saying to us and what they do. And so it's better not to check. And so we lose the habit of checking, or we lose the skill, or we never develop the skill of checking what uh, is an authentic expression and what isn't. What is an intention, an expression that's kept, and what isn't. It's less painful in childhood, and less anxiety producing in childhood for that. That all making sense. One of the things that happens to people who grow up to be dismissing is that the primary exploration, the things that really matter to them because they aren't valued, tend to be held in complete secrecy so that they can be preserved. We're talking about how does an avoidant person express intimacy, and really the answer is in the stuff that really matters. It's uh, for the most part kept entirely secret from everyone. And so the process of a dismissing person opening up is being willing to express that stuff that's been hidden the whole time. Um, you can't show the things that really matter to you, because if they don't line up exactly with what the caregivers want from you, it's devalued in childhood, and that is too painful. And so it becomes this secret inner world that's protected from really from the expression of it to other people. Doesn't mean it isn't motivating. It doesn't mean it doesn't drive decision making, even consciously. But what it isn't done is expressed openly to other people because the painfulness of it being uh, devalued in the family system over and over. I was going to say how you learn emotions. Um, uh, the You're an infant. The caregiver sensitively attunes to you. They empathetically connect to you. Uh, they understand what emotional state you're in. They mirror that back to you so that you see reflected in the face of the caregiver their interpretation of what you are experiencing. You begin to associate the physical sensation in the body with the facial expression, and then in language, the caregiver expresses to you what they call that particular state of being. And then they teach you how to manage or regulate uh, that emotional state. If you have somebody who comes and is attentive and pays attention to you and has the capacity for empathy and is able to transmit all of that information to you, we have an 85% chance of having the same attachment strategy as our primary caregiver. If you come out of early childhood without the skill to discern emotional states because you learn to suppress them, it's likely that your caregiver was using the same skill set. And the suppression of emotion was what you learned rather than which emotion you're feeling, right? And how to manage it except through suppression. So you didn't have the mirroring effect. And so it may be hard to understand uh, what that is. That's for that hard or shut down, cognitive only person. Maybe they did uh, give you enough of an instruction that you can read facial expressions and body language. Some dismissing people are really quite adept at reading facial expressions and body language, but they don't feel it. It's a cognitive exercise, not an emotional exercise. They use it as a way of understanding how to present themselves, and then they present a facsimile of that rather than an authentic expression of it. In transactional relationships, which is the currency of uh, uh, avoidantly attached people on the organized side, um, there's agreements about the trades of care. So you do this for me and I do that for you. And it's transactional, and each transaction is basically set up uh, individually. The main difference between transactional care and collaborative care is that in collaborative care, you undertake the care of the whole person, and they undertake the whole care of you. And in a transactional relationship, it's really uh, uh, almost one at a time that the deals are made. We should also talk about disorganized people who are avoidant, fearfully avoidant people. There's quite a bit of difference in the way that organized, dissociating people and uh, fearful avoidant people operate. Uh, there isn't the suppression of emotion in fearfully avoidant people. It's more of a push-pull cycle of fearfulness overtakes. They want and desire closeness, and they'll come toward it. But when it gets too close, they become frightened by it and withdraw. So it's this swinging back and forth. And actually, I'll talk more about that next week. Um, because the dynamics are so different. The main thing is in both of them the avoidance of intimacy, um, but it just manifests quite differently. Secure people go with secure people. That's the most common. And the second most common is preoccupied people going with dismissing people. It's a good match. The capacities of the dismissing person and the capacities of the preoccupied person. I like to call it 1 + 1 = 1 in terms of mentalizing and emotional regulation. The dismissing person, because they use transactional relationships, are very focused on secondary exploration, the gathering of time, energy, and resources in order to trade for the care that they need. The primary exploration is completely hidden and held privately because that was the way to preserve it in childhood. It wasn't safe to express it. Preoccupied people are willing to trade proximity for care, and so that works well for the dismissing person. The dismissing person allows the preoccupied person proximity to them and in exchange for the care that they receive. The preoccupied person doesn't explore, and so they live vicariously through the secondary exploration of the dismissing person, but it doesn't satisfy in a deep way their need for primary exploration because they're not usually privy to the primary exploration of the dismissing person. So what that means is that you maintain a pretty steady distance between each other in the transactional roles that you undertake. But what we're really talking about is how do you bridge that and so that you become intimate. The dynamic of a non-intimate relationship is that the distance between is maintained by both people. So if one person is approaching, the other person is withdrawing. And if the person who's consistently approaching gets fed up with never being able to reach their partner and they stop and turn in the other direction, then the partner reverses and becomes pursuing. So it's a back and forth. Usually in the beginning, the dismissing person love bombs is the colloquial term, seduces the preoccupied person until the preoccupied person engages in pursuit of the dismissing person, and then the dismissing person begins to withdraw. So the dynamic is always one of maintaining the distance. In a secure functioning relationship, one person moves closer and the other person moves closer. One person withdraws, the other person stays the same or withdraws. So you have this dynamic of closeness and withdrawal, closeness of withdrawal, which is where intimacy can happen. So that if you are a dismissing person and you wanted to change the dynamic of closeness, of intimacy, you might think that all you had to do was reveal yourself. All you had to do was seek closeness. But most of the time you're in a relationship with somebody who's keeping the equilibrium, keeping the distance the same. And so as you pull closer to them in this attempt to seek intimacy, they're going to withdraw. Uh, and if you put them in a corner in a position where they have a hard time being able to easily withdraw, they're going to reject in order to maintain the distance. So that it isn't a unilateral decision that you can make in terms of relationships to seek intimacy suddenly. You have to engage the relationship and change the dynamics of it so that there's an agreement between you to abandon the non-intimate approach and allow this dynamic of closeness and withdrawal, closeness and withdrawal. The reason it can be tricky for a preoccupied person is that proximity is the goal mostly for them. So the dynamic of closeness and withdrawal, closeness and withdrawal is not something that works that well for them. They're also in pretend mode a lot of the time, pretending to be who it is that you want them to be. And if you move into a dynamic of intimacy, you're also moving into a dynamic of authentic expression. And if you're in a relationship with somebody who's in pretend mode most of the time, what you're also asking of them is that they stop pretending and become authentic. And so that for most preoccupied people is a Herculean ask, right? how difficult that is for them, if they even know anymore what it is to be authentic. On the dismissing side, what you would have to do is be willing to share your authentic uh, exploration, which is tied up with a terrible sadness of a childhood of neglect and rejection. And this is also very challenging. So it isn't a simple decision to just become intimate. There's a lifetime of conditioning set up against that happening. If you, for instance, were a dismissing person and you suddenly decided that you were going to be intimate and you would just share about your primary exploration, this thing that you've been keeping secret your entire life, and you were in relationship to a preoccupied person who suddenly felt trapped, they would be rejecting, which would be a repetition of the early childhood experience, which would just, in most cases, what it does is shut down the attempt at intimacy. Is that all making sense? And so we have to begin to do this. In order for a preoccupied person to tolerate the closeness and withdrawal, that separation is about exploring, right? They would have to begin to learn to explore something that had real meaning to them that would be more important than the emotional regulation that comes from proximity. The dismissing person starts out as an auto-regulator. And so what they would have to begin to allow is somebody else to help emotionally regulate them in a conscious way. But the preoccupied person who is used to seeking proximity and emotionally regulating the dismissing person would have to turn the attention to themselves and learn to emotionally regulate themselves so that they had the capacity to separate and begin primary exploration. Preoccupied persons tend to be uh, able to support the exploration of someone else pretty well, but they're not so good at determining what they might want to explore and then supporting themselves emotionally while they go do it. And so there's a lot to do in that way. But maybe you're a dismissing person who prefers the power coupling dynamic where both of you are dismissing in the relationship. Now that's a little bit easier to manage. Christian.
George, do you find that um, I wonder if such a dynamic is a thing where the avoidant person is trying to do kind of a primary exploration and maybe they're like the little baby gazelle and it's not it's like new to them and they're asking their partner who's more preoccupied for that support. Uh, does it ever happen that the preoccupied partner is kind of good at supporting the kind of secondary exploration of the avoidant partner, but not so much this kind of new, unsure primary exploration?
I don't think that it's necessarily true that the dismissing person can't do their primary exploration. I think they can do it. What they don't do is ever share it with anyone. So what's vulnerable for them and the support they need is not in doing the exploration, but in the preoccupied person uh, receiving it and in supporting and encouraging it.
Okay.
Um, I think that the because the preoccupied person vicariously uh, um, enjoys the exploration that they are allowed in on, which is the secondary exploration, and they do support it and encourage it in a way that is to say they demand more of their partner. And actually, dismissing people can use that demand for greater social position, more money, more stuff that comes from the preoccupied person because it encourages them to compete more and get more stuff, which means they can transact for better care. That's useful to them.
That
But
sounds like a kind of like the preoccupied person's like dismissive by proxy.
right. Well, what you're but also understand the preoccupied person is not really supporting the dismissing person. They're getting their stuff,
Right.
right? It's a transaction. So they support they appear to be altruistically taking care of the dismissing person, but actually they're taking care of themselves because they're in a transactional exchange. I do this for you, and then I get the thing that I want. Is that making sense? So it's always, I'm taking care of you so that you'll take care of me. It's never, I'm taking care of you so that you'll be taken care of, which is the secure dynamic. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Mhm.
I'm doing this for you, and I'm telling you that I'm doing this for you because I'm an altruistic, beautiful person, and it's free, but actually, you're paying me for this. I'm getting what I want from this. So it's always, I do this so that you'll do that. It's never, I'm taking care of you because you need the care.
Okay. Cool. That would make it seem like the preoccupied person probably wouldn't be very interested in supporting the primary exploration. If the primary exploration is a very kind of personal thing to each person, then what would
And
that?
then it takes them away from the secondary exploration.
Right.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay. Interesting.
Um, yeah. You want to do what? It's very funny. You know, one question that always comes into my mind is, what is the purpose of this life that we have, this one wild and precious life that we have? And, you know, we get trapped in this culture. Um, I liked Chomsky's description of it, which is we're allowed a vibrant discourse in a very narrow band of ideas, and anything that doesn't uh, land within that very narrow sliver of discourse disappears. And if you think it was bad before AI came along, it is going to be a vacuum of everything except what's allowed in this very narrow band of discourse. What's acceptable? What should you spend your life pursuing? And at the end of all of it, will you be happy that you did? Paul?
George, I probably have a couple of questions because I just want a very short one. The implication from the Chomsky quote was that to say that the very narrow band is what's socially acceptable, where you won't be marginalized because you're exploring something outside that band, as
Yeah,
opposed to the human brain can only get so interested in so many things. So there will be a narrow band of things you're interested in, regardless of what society thinks.
um, um, mm, I don't know.
Fair enough. Worthy of exploration,
Um,
perhaps. Um, that was sort of immaterial because maybe to get to the it's probably a twofold question about one, just to confirm that the way I'm thinking of intimacy is the way that you're thinking of it when you describe it. So I'm taking it to mean both the in the moment, what is really true, so the authentic expression in the moment of what's happening that's important to convey, and then the linkage to the primary exploration of like what is most enlivening to you that you want to share with others.
right.
And
Both of those.
um, anything else that you're thinking of that I haven't mentioned?
Um, I mainly think of it as your ability to express what your experience is. And if we were to just expand that a little, that the fear of abandonment does not get to the point where it's so frightening that if you express something to somebody, that is to say, you become so afraid that if you expressed what you were actually thinking and feeling to somebody, that they would abandon you, that you don't express it as a result.
Mhm.
So the capacity to be intimate with somebody else would mean that you're able to freely express your authentic experience to them without being frightened that in doing so they would abandon you.
Yeah, helpful. And it brings me to the next question.
Uh-huh.
When you speak of abandonment, um, are we talking about the full spectrum of the anticipation that it might lead to the loss of the relationship in total, or starting maybe from, or is it just as simple as they might be so disinterested in what you're sharing as to abandon you in the moment of something that's emotionally important to you, and that's painful to not have the attuned accompaniment.
Right. Well, I think both of those are true, but
Yeah.
the from the child's perspective, it's you don't survive, right? From that very
Yes.
primitive level, because you're
And that's
abandoned, you don't survive.
mhm.
That's what
And that's
makes it so
probably
compelling.
maybe a different way that when I think of this question, I was thinking the other day and wanting to ask it, it actually did come back to that, which is it's the adult expression, maybe sometimes, maybe often, the reliving of that, the, having caregivers in childhood who weren't able to meet the needs enough. So you are actually afraid of abandonment, even if it logically wouldn't make sense that you're going to be abandoned, but that is still kind of dominating the experience because it would be, lethal, or almost certainly lethal to a child.
Right.
And that hasn't been resolved, so it's still living there where you're worried they might
And
not be
then,
attuned in the moment, but that's still scary because it's like this childhood version of abandonment still alive. Is
well,
that
the loss of mentalizing that can happen in stress states can lead to very primitive
yeah,
formulations.
right.
But also, it isn't true just of childhood. It really depends where you fall on the socioeconomic ladder, whether or not uh, what the ultimate risk to survival might be in that.
Sure. Yep.
Um,
Very familiar with that.
so, but also, the conditioning, uh, the conditioned experience of it, secure people would probably react quite differently than a dismissing person who anticipates rejection and has, an elaborate defense system to hide out from other
Mhm.
people because that was a requirement of preserving anything that had real meaning to them in childhood. So that the consequence of plunging into the terrible sadness of that abandonment, that isolation, that rejection of anything central to them is quite a different experience than the preoccupied person uh, who gets or doesn't get what they need based on their the haphazard uh, experience of the caregiver. Um, and these are feelings, right? And
Yeah.
the momentary creation of reality, which uh, does not necessarily represent what's actually happening. The child perspective of the preoccupied person is if I do the right thing, they'll give me the care that
Hmm.
I, and that's a complete distortion of reality. The adult doesn't have the experience, oh, they finally did it right, so I'm giving them the care that they want. They're not paying attention to what the child is doing. And so sometimes they respond and sometimes they don't. It's haphazard. It's not as a result of what the child is doing, but the child is believing that they have some agency in it, which is which is easier for them to manage than that it's just completely the arbitrariness of the caregiver. And then disorganized kids, grow up in danger. And so for them, it just zips to life and death.
Right. So maybe that's a great segue if you have time for one more facet of this question. It's actually quite an independent question. So like, real lived experience of different kinds of attachment strategies going on. So the anecdote of my life wasn't particularly in danger as a child from my parents, but they were largely physically not present in my life. What I've noticed as an adult is that I'm really good at enmeshing, which looks a bit like preoccupied. I'm
Right.
also really good at hiding what's important to me, which looks like highly dismissive. And those two tend to have been fairly strong and fairly obvious to me even before I learned attachment work. And maybe I'll leave it at that. Let's say that, I realize most researchers who are active in the field of attachment do talk about, everything is, no one's perfectly one thing or another. But then there's, I think, the practical question for me is working in the attachment repair of kind of making sense of this on the one hand to make the repair activity valuable.
The complexly disorganized is one thing that happens, but also if you're preoccupied and you have to hide, then it looks more like passive preoccupation. It's hard to tell the difference between passive preoccupation and the passivity is often judged as being an avoidance strategy, but it's actually not an avoidance strategy. So that's where I would look. It's phenomenally popular in the tech world, which I find hilarious. It's supposed to be really rare, but it's ordinary in the tech world, which I think is
so interesting. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you, George.
So why don't we leave it there? We can continue next week with a focus on disorganized attachment, but why don't we do some meditation practice? Would you like to, one, do insight and concentration practice, two, a heart practice, loving kindness, or three, ideal parent figure protocol? We have 1, 2. So 2 to 1 so far. Oops. Do we have one more vote?
What was 3? I didn't understand.
1. 3 is to do some guided ideal parent figure protocol. Still don't understand. So
Yeah, you totally got that, huh? I was like, I don't know what that is.
so then heart practice or insight?
Choose for me. They both sound awesome.
I never can take over somebody else's exploration. It's always your obligation.
Okay. Number 1 then. I'm a weirdo. It's all, well, with my birth stuff, what we're talking about,
Huh?
I didn't have needs. That's my
You
perinatal
didn't.
therapist a couple of years ago helped me to understand that. I mean, I did, but I went through life as though I didn't. I
Right.
pushed through everything and everything worked out, but multiple sclerosis wasn't something I could do that with, and I didn't know that's what was going on.
Ah.
So that's kind of
One
what I've
is
come to understand.
concentration and insight, which carries the day. So go ahead and settle in. Okay, let go of the meditation. Comments, questions? Christian?
I was having some herein that Lady Macbeth must have been the preoccupied one and Macbeth must have been the avoidant one. But now that I think about it, they were probably just both avoidant.
I might go with the first constellation. All right. This weekend on Saturday from 9 to 1, we have the second Saturday of the meditation and addiction series. It finishes the following week. And then what else are we going to do? Starting on September 13th, we're going to do a meditation and attachment level 1. And then that'll run for 3 weeks. We're going to start a meditation and addiction level 2 on September 15th. That runs Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 6 to 7. We're going to do a how to date like a secure person, even if you're not, workshop on the 19th of September. It's Friday evening. It's an interesting thing. Let's see what else we got. We're going to start a meditation and attachment level 2 soon on October 21st. That's what's coming up. If you're interested in any of that, it's on the website. Take a look. Really appreciate your practice. I offer the teaching freely. But if you are resourced and can make a donation, that's also appreciated. Any amount is helpful. It helps support me and also the work we're doing. I look forward to seeing you soon somewhere along the path. Bye.